You can't bring your cat ears. We're not having that. Right, we'll get started. Just before we get started, can anyone called Mike just raise their hand, please? Mike, so we've got a couple of mics, yeah? Okay, that concludes the mic check. So, jumping straight in. I'm told I'm not supposed to look at the screen, but I can't remember my slides, so we'll see how we go. So my name is CCP Shortfall. I am the face of alcoholism for CCP. If you've been on the pub crawl, you'll remember this familiar orange jumpsuit. I can assure you I do not fit in it anymore, and we might even auction it off at some point. So my role here is a senior backend engineer. I basically do infrastructure, scaling, hosting, anything outside of the game, anything about making it work, you getting to it, distributing tends to sit into my remit to deal with. So that's infrastructure, cloud, the 3 Ds, DDoS, DNS, and distribution. And then part of my other role is an SRE in DevOps. If you don't know what they mean, don't worry, they're just there because I had to fill a slide out. So I'm going to start off with a couple of quotes. So one from our CEO. I'm at a point in my life where I find myself quoting myself. I had to put that in because I'm immediately going to quote myself because nobody remembers a good backend. This is kind of a motto we have as a team. No one has ever logged into a game twice because it was so good. No one has ever downloaded a game twice because it was so good. No one has ever created a character because it was so good. But if a game doesn't work, you will remember it. You will be on Twitter. You will be telling us it's not working. My co-host.
Hello, my name is Andreas, and as you can see on the picture, I used to be young and have more hair. That's why I'm now wearing hats. With that out of the way, so from working perspective, I started working at the 4Players League. Any competitive gamers here that actually did esports or are competitive in games? No one?
Couple, yeah, there's a few up there, yeah.
Okay. After that, I had the pleasure to join Microsoft as a technical evangelist. And before that, I actually used to work at the Online Football Manager, which is a German mobile gaming company. So I have a big history in game development, did a lot of stuff there. Then I joined Microsoft, a tech evangelist. So I used to be cool and be a game developer, then became uncool working for Microsoft. Then I stayed at Microsoft, becoming a global black belt. And no, you actually do not get belts if you get to that role. And then I ended up as a technical advisor lead in the worldwide Azure gaming vertical. Very long title. Now I'm getting interesting again because I have a short title now. I'm the head of B2B at Nitrado. I'm super happy to be here. And as end of my introduction, does anyone remember this one? Yes? Who played it? Awesome. I worked on that. So I hope you are welcome and you liked it. So, and with that, I'm giving it to Curtis, who will start off the presentation.
What is a session? It's a conversation that I started having about 2 years ago of like, how do we define what our players do? How is that different between, say, EVE Online or EVE Vanguard or EVE Frontier? And we came up with this statement. A collection of players grouped together to play a short-term match in a non-persistent single-game event. That's a lot of words.
And you started 2 years ago for that?
Very long session. And to give it a picture, we've got a couple of Vanguards here in a session. That is a completely made-up dev title, but the idea is they're playing on that game server for Vanguard for 45 minutes. It can also be broken down into lots of little game servers. The same players can be redistributed into different places. So the life and death of a session, I love this. I was trying to find an image that represented what a game session is. And this was the image I pulled off. So this is the CPU usage of a single game session. It's not very impressive, so we kind of have to make it a little bit bigger. So the life and death of a session, what we start off with is a session being born. So at 13:30, that came online and started using usages. At, I don't know what time that is. 13:38, it became employed, so we started running a game session on it, and then at the end, it died. Or in other terms, I recloned at 13:30, I reshipped at 13:38, and I got podded at the end of it. Time to insurance, 48 minutes. They weren't going to let me put that joke in originally. I don't know how I got it through, apparently. The other thing we need to consider is geolocation. So it becomes interesting when you look at the distribution of EVE Online players and how you all play around the world. I mean, we've got people from, where's everyone from? Give me some ideas. Like, I know we've got Australian players here. UK, yeah. Austria, okay. Give me somewhere even more exotic than Austria.
Poland.
We knew you're here. Yeah. And it's a very interesting problem that we have is the distribution of players, where they exist in the world and how they all play in a single shard and how that all comes together. I have some more exotic ones. We found in Vanguard we have a lot of Japanese players. Didn't expect that. And weirdly have a significant following in Australia, which has made my life a bit difficult trying to put servers out there. So that then presents itself with latency problems. So as you will know with EVE Online, everyone centralizes to a single location with a tick time of around a second. And then that provides an ample amount of time for those players' messages to get to that server. Everyone agrees what's happening, and then things happen. With the exception of tie-dye, which I'm not even going to touch on today, because I know how much you love that. That becomes slightly problematic when we look at things like EVE Vanguard. So to just look at that example first, if you're playing in the US and you're in a fleet fight, it takes around a second or under a second for your data to get across the internet, land at our data servers, be processed, and effectively go back. That is playable. That is fine. There are no problems there. Where that becomes a slight problem is when you're doing something like EVE Vanguard, which ticks every 60 seconds. So 60 times 60 seconds. There is not enough time in the world for messages to get to a central point. Those messages will disappear. You'll have lag, latency, generally just unplayable. So what we have to look to do is locate those servers more geographically around where those players need to be. That creates other problems in terms of when players go to bed or they stop playing, what do you do with those servers? And also, how do you get servers into the middle of Australia? And to that point, we have what I call the breakfast, dinner, and tea problem. If you want to argue with me about whether it's breakfast, dinner, or tea, I am from Yorkshire and I am right. So, and this was a snapshot that we took from one of our dev builds because I was trying to balance the scaling of our infrastructure around what the devs were doing. And as you can see, they all stopped playing at breakfast, they all stopped playing at dinner, and they all went home. At which point I was trying to scale the infrastructure to match what those players were doing. That gets worse as soon as games go out into the wild because you've also got to accommodate things like EastEnders and football. And how do you scale servers around those events without sitting there all the time looking for all the events and things that are going to happen? And to that extent, you have to balance your infrastructure around those sessions to deal with those highs and lows. And that can get quite pricey. You don't want to sit with servers there all the time not being used. So, summarizing what a session is before we move on. The characteristics of a session are incredibly short-lived, often measured in minutes. Typically my time, as you say, in a ship before I'm podded. They must be locally located. If we're to hit that refresh rate, they need to be very close so you can get to and from that server very quickly. And to that extent, you need low latency. We've all played games where there is lag and you can't shoot anyone and it's definitely the cheating and it's not because you suck at games. And then we all end up blaming latency for that. And to that extent, we need to then balance the over and underutilization of infrastructure more dynamically. We can't keep producing a game if we sit with hundreds of thousands of servers sat there doing nothing. At the same time, we want you to be able to play the game. And if we're having to wait for people to manually scale servers, bring them online, it's just a horrible experience. So, why the need to upgrade? So next part's going to talk a little bit about our journey of where we got to and why we think it's important to you to listen to what we're saying, or why it's important we're going to tell you about it today. So it started off really badly. I called up our hosting provider and was like, we're doing an event, I want more servers. And they went, no, you were actually kicking you off the platform, which was interesting. So then in 2023, we made a rushed migration to a managed provider. And that created a few problems. So what we have here is a representation of our overall build process. So it takes around 10 minutes for a game server to be built and ready to play. So this is a new version that we could put up there. And then it turns out that it takes a further 77 minutes for it to error or be playable, which if you're trying to hotfix a game server, that's 77 minutes, well, technically 87 minutes, where that game is unplayable. And then you still got to test it. And to that extent, it meant the overall dev and QA cycles of just developing our games was really difficult. Like, you could only get so many builds out in a day. You could only fix so many issues. You were capped by just how quick that could be made playable. So we moved to a more self-managed version of the product in August 2023, which shortened that down to about 20 minutes. But this being the game dev world introduced a few additional problems. So while we did improve the dev QA cycles, we improved the response time to hot fixes, which was great as we started to go into some of these events. And we also reduced the cost to operate. Always good to save money, I guess. What we introduced is a new problem. And this is my fault, and I am guilty of this. So basically, every time we deployed a new version of the game, we had to redeploy every single branch of the game at the same time. So if you were on live, suddenly your servers would start getting reconfigured because somebody in development was deploying a QA branch. Not a great idea for a game studio. So we committed, and I think I started this conversation at Fanfest last year, because I made a statement that seemed to get more gravitas than I intended, which was, everyone else is doing it this way, why are we doing it this way? We should do it differently. And that kind of then spiraled into like a 2-year project to move us to where we're at now. The other problem that we had to tackle was players, because the demand for game servers fluctuated significantly based on what shenanigans players were up to, whether they were grouping together to try and flood all the servers, whether they were purposely not deploying just to make me panic. That was a thing. I know exactly who that was. So we ended up with all sorts of stuff. Access gate, this was really difficult. When we make the game playable, trying to immediately scale to deal with the demand of players all over the world who suddenly want to be in this game. Or the first time we went live the other way, where I massively over-egged it by about 400 servers and then nobody turned up. So trying to balance that is quite difficult. Balancing patches becomes difficult, like having enough infrastructure. It all obviously winds down when we patch. No one's in the game. Why do we need the servers? Then as soon as that patch comes in, everybody rushes in and they're on the servers, and that's when you get things like long matchmaking times and like failure to matchmake. And then player shenanigans. I don't really know what happened here, but it was a lot, and we just suddenly needed a lot of servers. So we can't obviously predict all these, so we need a system that can do it for us. The other thing that we also have to deal with is time zone spiking. As you know, like EVE Online, there are certain time zones where certain populations of the world are a lot more active, which is very useful for when you're defending your sovereignty, but not so good when you're trying to balance the infrastructure out in, say, Australia, because they're all in bed, so why do you need servers apart from the 3 players who are still playing? So, to summarize, we needed a lower spin-up time. We needed to get to game to market quicker. We needed to get servers out there so players can get on them quicker. We needed to improve the scaling response time. We cannot be waiting 5 minutes for a new server to come online every time. If a server crashes, then we end up with a scenario where players just cannot play a game for 5 minutes. And also, we can't be taking down all branches of the game at the same time everyone want to deploy something. We need to reduce that speed to market. So how quick can we get new features out there so we can start testing them? How quick can we hotfix? And finally, containerization. We have a big bee in our bonnet around containerizing everything to make it portable and move around. And we just didn't have that. And finally, cost. But I'm not going to talk about cost because it's boring. We all like saving money. So, framing our mindset. I'm just going to get a drink because, as you can understand, I've just been talking for the last 15 minutes.
It's fine, and you're looking at me that I'm not talking, but I'm here and I will talk soon. No worries.
You can start lifting some weight, you know. You can't just be
what?
me. So, framing our mind. To be fair, I can't really make you do the framing our mindset for the CCP engineers. Okay, that backfired. Team was 4 engineers. So the backend team for Vanguard, who were tasked with introducing session gaming and looking at that for the whole of CCP, was just 4 engineers. We cannot do what every fintech, insurtech, FTSE 250 company does at scale, but we wanted to. And to that extent, we could have built a Kubernetes cluster ourselves, we could have done all this hyperscaling stuff, but we just did not have the staff to do it. And even though I asked, I was told no. So we went to the second mantra, buy not build. And I chased CCP Chimichanga around the other day to get him to finally give me a quote. I was kind of hoping it'd be like Banksy when he got the Met Police to kind of sign the back of his book, but he actually gave me a quote, so I have to read it out now. So historically, CCP invented everything. We digitally distributed EVE Online before Steam was even a thing. I'd say for about 8 years now, though, we've been driving towards buying technologies. Although, however, EVE Online does show its uniqueness that we can't just take them off the shelf sometimes. And that's kind of important because while, yes, we could just take a service that everybody knows and recognizes and just use it for it, we need to customize this in a way that really accents New Eden and really like matches what our players do. And to that extent, I'm going to introduce a really silly title called CCP, introducing CCP. It is not CCP the company, it is NASA's Commercial Crew Program, which you might think is a bit weird for a talk on server hosting, but there is logic to my madness. So what we learned very quickly is, if you remember NASA's Commercial Crew Program, they stopped building their own rockets and capsules and ships. And what they actually did was go to people to get them to build them and then effectively hire them back. And that's kind of the mentality we took going into this. Rather than build the spacecraft, NASA has contracts with vendors who provide the spacecraft. Rather than buy a hyperscaling, super-performant, mega-stable game server product, we have vendors who provide the hyperscaling, super-performant, mega-stable game server product. Nailed it. Nitrado.
That's us. Yay. I promised you I will speak at some point. And now it's the point.
You're just here for the really hard questions, basically.
Yeah. He told me he does not want to be bothered about networking.
I also told my boss that, and he wasn't too happy about that statement.
Well, I said nothing.
So this is for our data analytics team. This is a snapshot of our player base that runs sessions. So there's a few kind of standouts there, as you expect. We use this as a way of figuring out where we need to put servers so that we can have them next to our players so they have a good experience, right? So, do you want to explain these?
Sure. So something that we do at Nitrado, some of you might have heard about us when you had a Minecraft server or anything else. So what we do at Nitrado in the B2B area, obviously we operate our own data centers, and these are just some of the spots where we operate and co-locate our own data centers, right? So we are very distributed over the world. Now, the great benefit of that, obviously, for you is that you can benefit from very low latency, right? Because we can get very close to your locations. Now, something that Curtis mentioned is that scaling is the hard issue. And how do you solve for scaling if you have a building somewhere where you need to put data center hardware into it, buy it, plan it, and build it out? And the answer is the cloud. And I like the title, Cloud Differential Scaling, because that's exactly what we are doing. So we are obviously utilizing our own infrastructure that we operate. So we have our own infrastructure teams that are doing nothing else than data center operations. But we are working with cloud providers as well to scale into them whenever needed. And that's the beauty of the system, because you're not limited to your bare metal capacity anymore, but can scale dynamically. And in this case, we partnered up with CCP to scale into AWS for Vanguard. Whenever we have not enough capacity, or you guys are going crazy and creating spikes that no one expected, can now go into AWS to quote-unquote unlimited scale. I'm laughing because I know that unlimited is not always unlimited, but it's close to it.
Challenge accepted. I think we also have the ability to scale into Azure and GCP as well.
Yes.
So it has simplified our approach to acquiring infrastructure as and when we need it. You can deal with this one.
Well, not too bad. So something that, when we're talking about latency, one thing that you are seeing is like, okay, getting people close to the servers is important, but there's more things to it, right? So one thing that we have at Nitrado, we have our own ASN. Anyone here knows what that means? Or a couple of persons?
Yeah, okay.
All right. For the persons who don't know what that means, we are basically part of the public internet, and we own our own part of the public IP space in the internet. This makes us sound really important. We really are. Now, jokes aside, it gives us a couple of benefits, right? Because we can do certain things that others cannot do. Mainly speaking BGP announcements to optimize for latency, improving network performance, so you have better latency, less jitter when you are connecting to the servers. Obviously, there's a security aspect to it as well, because it's the hand of us that's operating it, and we can optimize the network differently than other ISPs would do, basically. And all of that is something that you benefit from, hopefully. So when you're playing Vanguard at some point, and it works, please remember us, because as Curtis mentioned in the beginning, no one remembers a good backend team.
No one remembers a good network either.
Exactly.
Also, one of the other things on that is like we didn't have to build that. Like it is great in the buy not build approach that I don't have to worry about networking. Not so much in the sense of the local stuff, but just building that. I also don't have to worry about this. Does anyone know what this is? Yep, undersea cables. Apparently these are getting cut all the time, so I really don't have to worry about that. One thing I love about working with Nitrado on this is I looked at this and just went, no. And then you obviously look after it for us.
Yeah, and I said, yes, please. No, jokes aside. Unfortunately, due to our business, we just have to deal with it anyway. And we thought maybe others can benefit from us dealing with it anyway. A good example for what this actually means and how this all comes together is an example that we might want to make where someone is playing in Brazil, right? So hardware in Brazil is very expensive because power, cooling, it's relatively hot there, right? So there's a lot of cost associated to it. So it would be easier to just put the hardware into Miami and let the people in Brazil play through Miami. But can you do that is the question. And not everyone is able to answer that or handle this type of situation. We are, because again, we are on our ASN, we can do our own BGP announcements, and we do know where these cables are, and we can pair strategically with these providers for these cables. So we can offer very good latency, even when the distance look very different from what you're used to. There's this one thing where in competitive gaming, everyone looks just where's the server located at, and if the server is located more like 50 kilometers away, they get upset because then latency is bad. What some people do not realize is even though the server is away further from time to time, the quality of the network and the performance of the network can be significantly improved if you know what you're doing.
And this is a really good manifestation for players because it allows players from different parts of the countries, the worlds, etc., to play together easy. You know, we all have friends that we've met in EVE Online that maybe you want to, they're in the US time zone, you're in EU. Playing on a server together is like, who's going to suffer? Like, who is taking the pain this time and having really bad latency? And by having these optimized for latency networks means that actually it's a lot easier for players who sit in different continents to play together and have a good experience. And we know from experience, like, there was a saying someone said, and it blew my mind. I'm not even going to try and butcher it, but basically, like, the different nationalities that exist within a squad can be so varied. I always thought it would just be like people in EU playing with people with EU, and it's just not. So, obviously, we're working with Nitrado. And we need to talk about why. Like, why does this matter? And we talked about the reasons we needed to upgrade. So the first thing was speed to scale. I called this the ECG because it looks like an ECG. And what this represents is our ability to respond to scaling events. When you do things, the flatter this yellow line, the better we're performing. Because that line represents the number of available servers that players can consume as and when they want instantly. So anytime we have a small spike in that, that represents an increase or a loss of scaling capability. Obviously, if we're too high on that graph, we're paying for servers we probably don't need. And if we're too low, we run into a chance that maybe we don't have enough players for our servers. Now, that graph is not very useful. So if we do a bit of zoom in, God, I love PowerPoint, we can start to actually put some figures on that. So this was in one of our play tests, and it took exactly 15 seconds for new servers to come online. So as players were requesting and releasing them, we were scaling up and down dynamically. And when you consider that originally this was 5 minutes for a new server to come online, to get down to 15 seconds, and I would suspect it's less than 15, I just don't have the fidelity in the data to prove it's less, but 15 seconds is good. I mean, I'm happy with that overall. And when you consider like how flat that graph is, like it's kind of an anti-pattern because I'm like, I call it an ECG, but I really want it to be dead. Like I just want it to flatline. So maybe I don't call it an anti-ECG, a clockwise ECG maybe. So the other thing of it is instant scaling. On our previous provider, and these are real numbers, Vanguard at a minimum will use 1 CPU and 2 gigabytes of RAM. It's pretty efficient. As far as Unreal goes, that's pretty good. But at surge points, particularly when people are doing shenanigans like deploying thousands of objects they shouldn't be deploying, it can exceed the memory usage quite significantly. And to that extent, that kind of forced us to pick a server size that wasn't really optimum. Most of the time, we had 6 gig of memory just sat there, and we're paying for that, right? And that's eating the ability of sessions we can run. We've got 3 CPUs just chilling, doing nothing. And then you start to stack that over a couple of servers, and you know, each one's got 3 CPUs, 6 gig of RAM. I'm not going to do math on the fly because even that complicates it, but it's just really inefficient, right? So one of the things we wanted to look to is like, how can we better utilize that? Like, this is a really good graph that kind of shows how much waste we were actually showing per game session. Like, think of the environment, like how much environment is getting wasted there? Like, how many trees are dying because we had to use that, right? Not great. So we moved to a slightly different model where we now have the ability to set a minimum reserved. So every single game session will start with 1 CPU and 2 gigabytes of RAM. And what it then can do is borrow from a shared pool. So effectively, when we do hit those surge points, it's capable of borrowing from the underlying infrastructure to scale to whatever we mean. And that becomes very powerful, and I'll talk a little bit about why later on in the future, but the idea being we can now cram a lot more game sessions on there, we can scale a lot quicker, and we can give them the exact amount of resources they need. And to put another graph up, the same one, that's how it looks now. That's like 75% less trees. And then anything that sits above that white line would just be a scale. So we would just use resources that are nearby rather than having to pre-precision them and pre-have them there and effectively just sit them wasting. The other thing that's really advantageous that I didn't expect when we built this is we no longer have to provision separate environments. Development and production sit on the same infrastructure. We're no longer sitting with the production environment doing nothing, burning dollars, burning trees, killing whales. It all just sits in the same platform. And that becomes very advantageous for development. We can move things very quickly between them without having to scale things up. When we do playtests, the answer is always yes now because the infrastructure is always there. We don't have to worry about taking time out of dev cycles to get infrastructure ready. And we don't have to worry about, as I say, burning dollars. DDoS.
Yeah, networking again. So no. That said, quick question in the room, because I know that you like breaking world records and stuff, and I do know that you're doing fun stuff in EVE sometimes. Anyone here has experienced DDoSing something that they are playing? Okay.
Being the DDoSing or being DDoS? Because I wouldn't admit to the first one.
Probably both are interesting, but for no, I cannot ask if someone.
Names.
I cannot ask someone if they are doing DDoSing. Who knows someone that does DDoSing? Okay, that's better. All right. Yeah, so this is something that we at Nitrado are very used to. You might have heard about games like Ark or DayZ, which are prime targets for DDoSing as well. So we did build our own DDoS solution called Steel Shield. Steel Shield differentiates in 3 different levels. Level 1 is just basic rate limiting on data center level. So basically, our goal is to keep our network alive and do not overload it. With level 2, we are going into basic traffic filtering. The cool part about Steel Shield in general is if you have, look at cloud provider with their DDoS solutions and their machine learning and AI stuff, it sounds all awesome. But something that you notice as well, there is a delay. So until the AI or the machine learning model detects an attack going on, it takes time, usually around 5 minutes. And if you are playing a game and it takes 5 minutes for the infrastructure to kick in to protect you, you already lost your game, you're already out, you're already screwed at the end of the day, right? So that's why Steel Shield is actually operating inline, meaning we can detect in real time and mitigate in real time. And this starts with level 2. Where we do allow lasting basic traffic filtering. And the real interesting piece kicks in level 3, where we are able to do something we call proof of identity. So what we are doing is we are signing every package that the client or the player, you, are sending to the servers in our infrastructure. We will check them. If they are valid and they are signed, awesome, we will forward the package. This allows us basically to do a 0 false positive rate in DDoS scenarios, where we keep your game sessions alive, even if they are under attack. Another fun side note, for the people that know people that do DDoS, because of that system, we know who tried to attack. And yes, these guys know then as well. So be careful when you're actually trying to abuse that system.
And just on that, every packet is signed by each individual account. So your traffic is unique to you. One of the problems we do know exist is people spoofing to be other people, pretending to be the IP address of someone they don't like. Level 3 for us is very exciting because it is the only product in the field, as far as I'm aware, that does this and offers the highest level of DDoS protection and security we could do. I had to put this slide in. That's it. It's 60% cheaper. I'm not going to talk about it. Yeah. Less plex, yes. So We are coming towards the thing people might be more excited about, things we do next. I have to preface this, I'm an infrastructure engineer. I put nothing in the game, which means anything I'm excited about has to go through about 5 other people before it comes in. To that extent, do not get too excited. I will say words that will trigger people. I will say things that will make dust vets cry. Do not assume they are going in the game, but they are things... I do that anyway, to be fair. They are things that we are excited about. They are new capabilities that we can start to bring to the table over the next couple of years. Potentially soon TM. These are not features we promised to implement. I'm beating the drum on this one. I want to be really clear. We are not implementing these. They are capabilities that we are now enabled by Game Fabric that excite us. So these are things when we went through this game server evaluation piece, we thought they are going to be things players are going to want to do in the next 5 to 10 years. They are things other people in the industry are not currently doing now. I did a meme. We are not implementing these things, but this is what you're going to hear. You can never make an EVE player happy, can you? Persistence.
All right. So I'm not just talking about networking. So yay me. Persistence is a very interesting thing and a very interesting topic. And especially in the world in game server orchestration, what we are doing is a super hard topic. But the idea is very, very simple. You are in your game session. You do something in your game session. You leave the game session goes away, comes up again with the same state, and you just can continue what you did before. This sounds super easy, but trust me, it is not. There are a lot of technical hurdles on getting this implemented, and something that Game Fabric enables is something we call local persistence. So we enable the game server to write to the local disk of the server, and we are persisting that state in a reliable way. Technically, you are even able to move your state from one region to the other. For example, I'm sitting in Australia playing EVE Vanguard, doing something. I shut it down, get into the plane, fly to Iceland because I'm at Fanfest and want to continue playing. Theoretically, you can just, your state can move with you into the new region and you can continue playing on that.
And this becomes very exciting in terms of the game modes that we want to enable. Again, do not get excited, but like social spaces, for example, could be enabled. We can perceive those spaces. They can move around. They can be recovered. When you die a lot like me, you can go back to find your loot. You can draw fallacies on subject walls and then re-find those 10 days later. The fact persistence exists in sessions is a bit of an oxymoron, really, because sessions are, as we discussed earlier on, meant to be short and finite. But we like persistence at CCP. We like things to stay. I mean, you look at EVE Online, we've done persistence for 25 years, and we feel that all our titles should have an element of this in there. More people, more mayhem. This was probably the one I was most excited about. So if you remember this that I talked about earlier on, we theoretically no longer have a limit on the size of a resource for a game session. That, in theory, then translates to we can technically cram as many people we want into a single game session. This becomes very interesting. Like, what's the biggest game server anyone's been? Like 128 players, like Battlefield 5? Like, that doesn't scare me anymore. It used to. Because in theory, like, we can just keep scaling these servers out. We can make them as big as they need to be. They can dynamically scale based on who is screwing the game session over. Like, if you are spawning lots of things, these game servers will just keep getting bigger. But that also means that we can start to do big events. You know, we can get lots of people into a single game session, you know, some sort of social space or like a big battle, etc. Like, we're no longer fixed very early on in development what they need to be. And then, finally, dynamic buffers. The thing that keeps me up at night is people using all the infrastructure. Like, I wake up, I get called out at 3 a.m. because somebody somewhere is having a big battle and we need to deploy servers. We no longer have that problem in a sense of we can dynamically borrow infrastructure as and when we need to satisfy the demand of players who are playing the game at that point. Very similar to EVE in a sense of rules, tools, not rules. You play how you want, and we will just keep providing the infrastructure that sits under it. This means that we potentially don't have to do things like tie-dye in Vanguard or anything like that. This potentially also means that we don't have to limit the session sizes. And again, these are all things that aren't in the works right now, but they are things that are enabled by Game Fabric. Do you have any comments on Dynamic? Have I covered it?
I think the only comment to make here, you remember Curtis' desire to flatline? This helps him flatline.
And on that, does anyone have any questions?
Have you ever DDoSed?
You know I DDoS myself, that's why you're asking. Yes. We put a new DDoS layer in using Steel Shield, and we rate limited ourselves, and then it started hammering our AWS backend, and because of that infinite scaling, I woke up to about 70 servers just hammering our backend. And we actually nearly triggered an event because the service host thought your network was attacking their network, and it was just me being bad at code. So thank you for that peaceful. Yes?
If you scale up, do you also... Because I'm also doing similar things as you do. Now, one of the questions that we have is, when you scale up, what about scaling down? The resources no longer necessary for the session, because as you saw with, like, you know, some of the things that we do in Vanguard, what about if these things disappear and you now have like 16 gigs of RAM for a server that now needs 8?
So I guess is the question, like, how do we scale in a server that is already in session?
Yeah.
So because it's dynamic, that min requirement is what the server is allowed. It can just pull and remove as and when it wants. There is no, you've had it for 5 minutes, I'm going to keep it to the end. Any more questions, or was it just a really thorough presentation? Yep. That's a lovely bandana.
So you noticed about making a bigger events, and I'm getting curious. When GTA 4.4 will stop being slow after some folks shooting fireworks?
I would say I am the wrong person to speak to about that, but CCP Chimichanga will happily take that question. We have 8 more minutes for questions. Yes? Wait, no, wait.
1 second.
Wait.
Who gets it first?
Right, okay. You wait, you go. He got the carnage.
Okay, so you said you can improve the traffic based on like those lines. It's mostly fiber optics. So technically, like there's finite speed of light, so you can improve it some way like beyond that.
No, unfortunately, no.
Yeah.
But once we figure it out, we keep it to ourselves and make a lot of money.
Okay. Thank you.
Now, just to be totally clear, right? So the optimization that we can drive enables you to just be not as location dependent anymore, especially if you have a game like a Vanguard, which is very sensitive because it's a shooter. So people are very sensitive to it, to latency and jitter in general, right? So obviously, we cannot outpace speed of light yet, but we are working on it.
I think, just to be clear, it would be great if every single packet traveled at the speed of light to the source destination, but it just doesn't quite work like that, does it?
Right.
It stops at every service station on the way. Yes? Go.
Why do you hate Australians so much?
Don't. I love Australians. I think the thing that's blown my mind about all of this is I didn't expect it, I didn't anticipate it, and then seeing Australian servers and Australian players outstrip European players blew my mind. I was like, I don't have enough servers for this. Like, I just didn't anticipate it. And one of the problems we also had with the previous provider is we didn't have servers in Australia. Like, it was very difficult to make that work. So when we thought about, and I'm not going to go all the way back because we're running out of time, but that location diagram, like, that was very useful after a number of play tests to figure out, like, where are our players actually coming from and where do we actually need to put servers? And that then factored into the conversation with Nitrado of, like, who is the provider that can satisfy that requirement? So to answer your question, I don't. In fact, if you find me later on, my lanyard actually has an I Love Australia koala bear on it.
Yes. He basically outsourced that to us. So now you are our problem.
Why do you hate Australians?
I don't.
So I have a question, as I have a pretty much big experience of playing session shooters and just shooters and all of kind of action games. What is your goal for latency for a ping as for Vanguard?
What is our...
How long you want to make it? How low?
How low do we want the latency to be? 0? But let's go speed of light. I mean, like, the objective is to just get better and better, right? I think where we want to get to is a point where we're under the latency threshold that the server deems it unplayable. And that's the point where like NPCs start floating off into space. Like that's the point where you shoot and the bullets like peel like 30 seconds behind, and all those things that every single time you're like, they're cheating. It's probably not, it's just probably bad networking. We want to get to a point where players don't notice latency. Players, everything feels responsive. You click, something dies. You don't click, you die. Like, that's where we want to get to with latency. There is, like, as I say, 0 would be amazing. I don't think I'm going to be alive when we hit 0 latency, I'll be honest. Like, not that I'm dying anytime soon, I just think it's a very difficult problem.
Well, I wouldn't be surprised if we could achieve it in not even 5, but in 8 years.
Why do I feel like you're about to sell me a product?
I'm gonna too.
But no worry, Curtis. I know how it looks like when game servers unexpectedly have 0 latency. They don't like that. So anyone knows how to divide by 0?
Yeah.
No? Okay. No, jokes aside, I worked on xCloud, and we had servers and game clients all of a sudden next to each other. Latency becomes 0, servers go boo.
Yes.
So what have you done to fuck off your old provider? That they call you and say,
I'll
fuck
be honest.
you, I'm not selling you service anymore.
So the first provider just decided to get into the metaverse, which really wound me up. The second provider, I'll be honest, is sat in this room. So I'm not going to point them out, but yes, when we decided to move like this, we're still very good friends with them, and they still come to Fanfest. So I don't think fuck off is the right word. I was actually told I'm not supposed to swear, and I think that was the only swear word I've said in this entire presentation, so I think I've done well.
So at what point could a buy versus build actually reduce tie-dye?
Well, there's a lot of economics in that. So I guess the buy not build approach, probably not. The buy not build is how we acquire the resources to deliver what we deliver. In this case, the way we would reduce tie-dye, and again, this isn't a direct, it's not something we're directly doing now, but if I was to speculate on it, the fact that we can dynamically scale servers and provide as much resource as possible, we would no longer in this instance have to pre-allocate to nodes to say there's a fleet fight coming, you should be fighting there. Because as we know, no one ever fights where you say you're actually going to fight, right? So to that extent, the server could just have the resources. It doesn't have to ask, we're not predicting that it's going to be somewhere. This diagram here kind of explains, like, you can just have as much as you want. You can have as much as what the top ones require. So the buy not build model won't fix that, but the solution we brought in through that could potentially reduce it, because effectively the server executable can do more because it has more resources. It's not having to stretch time out to process things quicker. Does that answer your question? Can you run to the back in 2 minutes and 17 seconds? Probably DDoSing myself. Yeah.
Hi, 2 questions. First, on the earlier graph, we were showing about 77 minutes latency between build completion to running server. Was that just the time to run the deployment pipeline for that particular provider, or were there like manual steps involved that increase that? And then secondly, do you have any security or leakage concerns running production and development on the same infrastructure?
Why would you ask that question? I've got 1 minute 30 left. So to answer your first question, effectively that was just how long it took the provider to take our game server, put it onto their hosting platform and make that available. And quite frankly, I actually wrote a blog complaining about how bad it was and how I was leaving them while waiting 77 minutes to get that out there. That is a whole different story. Find me at the bar later on. It is hilarious because they promoted that on Google search and everything. The second question, which I forgot, so could you repeat it for me? It was about security.
Yes, any security or leakage concerns running development branch and production branch on the same infrastructure?
No. One of the real advantages is containerization. So because everything is in a container, that is an isolated unit. What that does mean is we have to be careful when managing the underlying infrastructure layer, because if we take that infrastructure out, everything dies. And it was all right when we had a development cluster because you could just kill it and it was fine, it was no problem. You don't want to do that with your production side. So we do have to be a little bit careful. That is a thing we did anticipate, but containerization has made that very easy because we can just kill the container. Thanks for the questions. You have 30 seconds. No?
No.
No? There we go. Well done.